General Order 1. No starship may interfere with the normal development of any alien life or society. Better known as the Prime Directive, General Order 1 would be expanded upon and twisted over the various Star Trek series to become one of the most important fundamental principles of the Federation. But the question is, does it make sense? Hello and welcome to another episode of Does That Make Sense? A Star Trek themed web series that discusses various odd or inconsistent Trek topics brought up over the years by you, this channel's audience. In today's episode, we're taking a look at the Prime Directive. And as always, I'll be playing devil's little advocate about this topic, in order to foster amazing discussions in the comments section below. So without further ado, let's dive in and ask the simple question, does that make sense? A star captain's most solemn oath is that he will give his life, even his entire crew, rather than violate the Prime Directive. This non-interference directive was the embodiment of one of Starfleet's most important ethical principles. On its surface, the Prime Directive absolutely makes sense. After all, I think it's fair to say that none of us would like an alien civilization to come here to Earth and tell us how to run things. I mean, imagine if some species came to our planet and said, "You're no longer allowed to have nuclear technology because it could destroy your entire planet in a war." Though that idea might sound great, as it would prevent humanity from destroying itself in a nuclear holocaust, the idea would hardly be comforting to those freezing to death during the winter because there isn't enough power to heat their homes. Oftentimes in Star Trek, the Prime Directive is shown to be quite wishy-washy of a law. It is law, however, as Kirk makes that clear in the episode The Omega Glory of Star Trek the Original Series. Then seemingly, when the story requires it, the Prime Directive seems to morph into something very different. An idea of sorts, merely to keep in an officer's mind and to use one's own judgment when it came to violating it or not. In fact, Kirk himself would violate the Prime Directive repeatedly over Star Trek's history in episodes like A Taste of Armageddon, and seems to face no consequences at all for his actions. It's easy for us to see these violations as being honorable and just. I mean, the stories are set up that way after all. But in real life, laws are seldomly viewed in that manner. Remember the episode Pen Pals from Season 2 of Star Trek The Next Generation? That episode had a wonderful discussion of the Prime Directive and the implications it could have. And in that episode, Picard makes the choice to save an entire race from destruction. And morally speaking, I think we can all agree that that was probably the right thing to do. Yet oddly, a few seasons later, in the episode Homeward, Picard makes the opposite decision, to allow an entire race to die out. Only when Worf's brother forces the issue, by beaming up some of the planet's people onto the holodeck, does Picard reluctantly agree to help out. So what's the difference here? And the answer is, there truly isn't one. In essence, Picard and the crew of the Enterprise are doing the very thing the Prime Directive is supposed to protect us all from, playing God, as they have chosen who lives and who dies. Even before the Prime Directive would come into existence, Captain Archer would face a similar choice in the episode Dear Doctor, as they had found a cure, so to speak, that would allow the Valekians, who had a terminal illness on a planet that developed two species, to survive, but in the end chose not to give them the treatment, effectively sentencing the Valakians to death. Of course, in that episode there's some fancy dancing around to suggest that maybe the Valakians would find their own cure one day. But as far as Archer knew, his decision would wipe out that entire species. Not such a high-sounding ideal in either of those cases. Now, the argument that's always made is that if Starfleet or the Federation were to come in and save these species, then who knows what the implications could be. That species could grow up to become the Hitlers of the galaxy, snuffing out lives in every way possible for centuries. Personally, I think that's a silly argument. You see, that particular argument is based on a lot of what-ifs, while the reverse is based on fact, meaning a species will die out if you don't do something, rather than a species might develop another con. But I'm not saying that Starfleet or the Federation should go around interfering in everyone's business. I absolutely agree with the idea that the Federation shouldn't interfere with the internal politics of a species, something the Prime Directive would include in later series. But what I am saying is that if the Federation can help prevent the extinction of an entire species, that they should step in without hesitation. After all, I believe that a civilization that is assisted by the Federation is more likely to reach out its hand in peace, rather than a race that ends up losing millions, only to find out that the Federation could have helped and just didn't. I mean, in that scenario, who's more likely to become warmongers? And finally, Star Trek should get its views on the Prime Directive clear. Is it a law as we're told it is? After all, people can be arrested for it. Or is it simply something to keep in the back of one's mind? And if it is a law, then it doesn't matter what the reasoning is behind violating it. There would still be consequences. At least a trial every time someone did break it. Yet there isn't. Everyone goes around willy-nilly deciding who lives and who dies, who's allowed to have a war and who isn't, splitting fandom right down the middle in the process. But what do you think? Do you think the Prime Directive makes sense as a law? How do you reconcile all the contradictions Star Trek has shown it to have? Do you think all violations should have some type of consequence to face? To force officers to justify their decisions to the public? Well, leave your thoughts and ideas in the comment section below. I'm looking forward to reading what you have to say. Live long and prosper.